I guess this is a roundabout video to Gary Emendham again. I had apologized to Gary on previous exit videos because I felt as if Gary deserved more credit than I was giving him. Sorry about that as a vernacular phrasing. But basically, I had considered him like a leg on a chair that was doing a large degree of supporting of the weight of those people that were sitting on the chair. Kind of a keep on repointing. Let's keep repointing to the ground. Let's keep on doing that. But and so in that I appreciated him. But in terms of the notion that he is able to deconstruct or was deconstructing his own philosophy, I say no, he definitely is not in the process of deconstructing his own philosophy. Otherwise, he would reach a consideration conflict, and the consideration conflict would be in terms of what adjectives to apply, or and what value decreed does the adjective have as it's being applied to different aspects, different signifieds that he's using in his lexicon, such as whether or not life is an imposition or life is a gift. Whether or not it's considered an imposition if the life is not considered sentient, or whether or not it is considered sentient. There didn't seem as if there was necessarily a breakdown made by Gary, and maybe because I was done giving time to him and to everybody. I stepped away from trying to reanalyze his positioning, but people noticed through the history of my treating Gary that we did find a hypocrisy in his integrity in terms of who he was. Number one, using ad hominems, calling fat for the sake of doing so, and then laughing it off like a clown in the background. Right, self-justifying his own aggrandizements, where at the same time he can grant those as as carpet beneath other people's feet, so to speak, in order to embarrass them or admonish them in some capacity. And I think that's really what was at issue, was that Gary, it appeared, could not tell whether or not he was being a jester to the court, this grand, like Star Wars Imperial Congress, whether or not he was being a jester to that on a whim, or whether or not he was being serious. And so the whole notion, the whole slip-slop between that which is theatrical and gestural, and that which is meant through gesturing, but meant seriously and meant as the case, there was a little bit of slip-slop that appeared needed some definite grounding. Now, if Gary had an "I'm being a clown" channel, but I'm going to, act serious within the arguments of being a clown over here, and then I'm being serious and maybe I have some clown antics thrown in over here, or just a complete eradication of clowning around, then that slip-slop would not be so important. But Gary, even in his maturation as a human being, has seemingly, in his own vulnerabilities, allowed himself to be clown-like at a time when, if he's going to offer, and as he's offering his philosophy to the world as some sort of meant ground, kind of like, look, I'm not trying to get the first step in this. I'm just doing my part, sort of like non-crediting, but I think Gary's also seeking accreditation for his own behavior. Like, I want to be a professor. I would like to get the accolades that come along with this kind of contribution that I formulated, right? As long as all of that's the case, then it seems as if he's going to carry on as if, like he said, even his argument about whether or not antinatalists should kill themselves, that I think is not a loop. I don't think that the antinatalist is given a good enough argument, like, oh, my self-interest has begun at the moment of my conception, or at the moment of my being able to mirror my the word I back to myself, or something that is an attribution of being desirous towards life and actually enjoying one's life, right? The idea that there is supposed to be this separation between kind of this I'm happy to be alive, and the stalting of, wait, I'm alive, therefore what? I'm entirely responsible for my life, sort of question that seems as if it's being forced into or wedged into maybe too young. When we talk about old souls, it's maybe because they're faced with very deep and complex problems at a young age, and that they have to deal with these being wedged into their life, so they have to make very wise or unwise decisions around certain naive psychological platforms wherever they're at. And I'm reluctant to use these terms in terms of platforms, because then it suggests grading or hierarchies or analysis in order to look at, oh, well, they're a part of the human complex as well. Let's make certain that we keep them statistically within the bell curve, so we're not going to inadvertently call them a savant, or we're not going to try to shut them down in terms of their additive contribution towards the mold or the form or the formalities that make up the wherewithal that we all are a part and party to, as being, westernized individuals, I guess, however you want to reduce the class of cases that are at hand. And so anyway, I guess what I'm getting to before I waft off too merrily onto the sidelines is that the notion, first of all, it's kind of just a reiteration, but it almost comes in the face of Gary's reiterative powers, and kind of it must be this way. If you are not in line or mature or graduated enough, you must get behind me somehow. And if you're not behind me somehow, grounding me, being the leg to the chair, part of the phloem that makes up this wooden leg to this chair, right, that's carved out, that's supporting this weight, then you are either full of bullshit, you're blowing smoke up people's asses, or you're speaking of fantasy land. You're being fake, right? As opposed to being able to look at, let's say, a logical nature of fantasy, as if there is such a thing as a logical nature of fantasy, right? Or levels of logical natures of fantasy, where the Matrix becomes the Matrix 2, and then instead of two ghosts, we have two Garys plopping into a pool that are mirroring one another in the background, that become now like the super sub-ego consciousness, that which one has to be prepared to war against, are the two ghost-like figures that are also in the background of Gary's spiral, spidery, dynamic web of insulary, inclusive, the closure of fractals that he invites a viewer as opposed to just a listener to engage in. So I'm very cautious about my viewing Gary's videos because of this substrata, this imbuement that is going on that is not considered part of the argument. The mere fact that Gary keeps posting it as part of the argument, even to post his face back and forth, I'll give him his face, but to post background accordingly, like why doesn't he do that background when he's doing arguments against other videos, right? Anyway, so my point though is to argue, at least in this video, once again, the notion that life is an imposition, the very is structure, deconstructionism would start at the is equation. It'd be at the point of the adjective, right? To say life is something other than life, and we're going to say gift, or we're going to say imposition. Now, I had come to sort of an internalized looking glass, a layer of, I guess I'd say, a schizophrenic reapproach to my own exteriority as I move out communally. And it is kind of like a cross-eyed, and it's what helps me embattle the notion of the two ghostly characters that Gary would present behind the camera, right? It's a internalized identification with myself as also being self-interested. That self means, once identity is included, to become self-interested. And that self-interest is the same thing that keeps the anti-natalists from wanting to kill themselves. And yet at the same time, it would appear that the anti-natalist does not want to become political and go be the opposite of the pro-lifers and sit outside of abortion clinics and say, look, abort the kid, abort the kid, abort the kid, just get that kid out of here because X, Y, and Z reason, where in fact they would make a great counter opposite to that argument outside of abortion clinics, provided that they wanted to put themselves forward as a political platform. And granted, maybe they're still in a young stage where they don't have a lot of traction in order to do that type of thing. But at the same time, the mere process, the mere application of being able to put oneself forward and back this does then require one to drop the notion of other people's self-interest to their own life, right? And hence dropping their own. Like that they themselves should be dropping their own self-interest in order to speak politically about other people's wanting to drop their self-interest. Now, derived energy would put forth, has put forth an argument that's not dissimilar to this, but the whole notion is that the anti-natalist should quantify the pains, the future harms, and make a summation of that. And then if their extraction or subtraction out of the life equation, quote unquote, is considered more beneficial, then whether or not it's for somebody that they're close to or not close to, whether or not they've graded other people's perceptions to what extent their life has value, they should, if they're losing self-interest in the face of granting this adjective towards all life, right? They want to grant it this importance and this ganglial apparatus, but then they want to strip away its importance and its self-interest, right? Even the zebra having self-interest to carry on outside the clutches of an alligator or whatnot. It's that whole notion that if one is going to strip life of its self-interest, that they should be first on the docket to strip it of its own self-interest. I'm not certain how the boiled down value equation that Gary puts forth does not allow for that stripping. There's a pause for the time being. Hopefully I made some sort of veiny connective argumentation here.